Good afternoon. Good afternoon. We are on the ACDA Hour at this time of the day on Sunday, August 20th. We will be having a discussion on emancipation, and this discussion will be led by no other than Brother Dr. Reverend Rudy Guyan. Dr. Guyan has a perspective on emancipation very different from what we are accustomed to. So, without further ado, I'll allow Dr. Rudy Guyan to introduce his topic. Dr. Guyan.
And welcome to everyone. I know we're starting very later than usual because of technical problems, but we'll make up. And even if we don't complete some other day, we'll complete the entire presentation. I'm promising that I'll deal with emancipation different from any other presentation you've seen or anyone has heard previously.
My first question would be naturally, how do you define emancipation, Brother Rudy?
Now, remember, we're in African History Month, and I'm keeping everything focused on our mindset rather than any other people's mindset. And I'm sorry that I'm aware that this particular, the theme for this emancipation, we have to acknowledge that the theme for this emancipation is health and wellness. We have taken all that into consideration. And we know that after we finish this particular presentation, it will be healing for our brain. I don't like to use the word mind. Now, I hope that by redefining all the concepts that we've heard relating to emancipation, I hope when we finish here today, we'll be speaking in our language. For example, in this presentation, we'll be dealing with words like slavery. We don't use slavery in respect to us. Emancipation, we will not say that emancipation liberated us. These are the things when we finish here today, we'll be able to be clearer on.
Okay, you're talking of clarity. So, how do you intend to bring that clarity to our minds? Because, what I'm hearing from you is that it's a different paradigm you're talking of. You're talking about revolutionizing our thinking of ourselves, first of all, and of our emancipation. I shouldn't say our emancipation, as of emancipation, rather.
All right. Brother Elton and listeners, I hold that the legal act of emancipation, according to everybody else, generally ends the authority someone has over another. That's a general focus on emancipation. For example, the hold a parent has on a child under 18 in this country. Our goal as Africans in this paper is to understand history of emancipation as it relates to the British colonial possessions, and to understand that the gains are in real terms for the people of Guyana directly and indirectly from the Emancipation Act. Please note that I did not know the Emancipation Acts. Please note that I did not mention emancipation as a singular noun, and this we'll explore further. Guyanese are not aware of the four Emancipation Acts passed by the British Parliament in the 19th century, and that is important. Yes. Whenever you mention emancipation, there's always a negative stigma. Yes, emancipation seems only according to generally, emancipation pertains to Africans, and the next word is slavery, and next thing is something is only Black people. Now, emancipation, this is what when we think of the word emancipation, there are many, many emancipations in the 19th century. That is very important to know, because they think and they're only the British. That's why we're talking about it. And I named the four emancipations, and especially one that is very relevant to our discussion here on emancipation. Now, there was the Catholic emancipation on the 13th of April, 1829. Now, it's good to know that for us to study that because we'll understand what was happening to the Catholics prior to that and how they, after going through what they went through, they then turned back and never sympathized with Africans. In fact, they end up exploiting, suppressing, etc. Africans. Then there was the Jewish emancipation of 1858. It's very important. People look at the Jews and say today they're progressive, but they were emancipated by the British. But emancipation that together with our emancipation of 1834, August the 1st, is that in the year 1843, the India Emancipation Act was passed. That is something that is not talked about. Maybe the omission of that in our education system may be either for racist reasons or just plain not knowing. But I know I would prefer the former. I would prefer to think that it was willfully left out. And I have something on reparation, and you in talking to that, you'll see clearly why that was left out. Anyway, there was the Indian Slave Act of 1843. And we have, as Africans here in Guyana, to take notice of that. Now, so conditioned are students of especially African history to report rather than to inquire, analyze, and present, that no paper on history of emancipation take into account any of those emancipations. So today, we will not dwell upon those emancipations, but we'll dwell upon that 1834, the 1834 Act, and the 1st of August 1834, no, the 1833 Act, sorry, and the 1st of August 1834 Proclamation. For this presentation, I will stress a great deal upon the need to define slave and slavery. We as a people here, Africans, have never been slaves, and as I go on, I'll explain that, but that is very, very important to us because slavery tends to be put down as if it's a bad concept or a bad social relation. Slavery is not a bad social relation. So I'll explain this as I go, but I hope that you can hear me. All right. It should be noted that we were placed into institutions where our foreparents were forced to labor. One, labor without any compensation. Two, when they were placed in those institutions, they were guarded by people who were like wardens. Three, the people who were guarding us were given instructions to either prevent us from escaping, and if he happened to escape, bring us back either dead or alive. And they were given a bounty, they were bounty hunters. Why that is important? No account of slavery in history you've ever seen that. So I want us to have in mind today that what happened to Africans in the Americas, including the Caribbean American islands called the Caribbean, were not slavery. We were placed into confines, which I call, and I would like everyone to take a note of this. We were placed in the world's first private prison industrial complexes, and they were called plantations. I repeat, we were placed in the world's first private prison industrial complexes called plantation. That is very important for us to take into account because today there's a lot of crocodiles tears being shed about private prisons, but we are the first person to place in it. So we were not slaves. And let me explain furthermore why we could not be called slaves. To become a slave, you must first, whether voluntary or by some kind of force, go to someone, which we'll call a master. We'll ask that person to give us food, or we expect that person to give us food, clothing, shelter, and protection. That is the basis criteria for slavery or to be a slave. Africans in those prison industrial complexes never asked anyone for food, clothing, shelter, protection. In fact, when their plantation keepers turned their backs, our foreparents were off. That means they never depended on them for anything. But which is most important to understand, what we should understand today is this. Today, we are slaves. Funny. Today, we are slaves. Every person that earn a wage is a slave. And I'm not being just using reality. I give you an example. Not so long ago or presently, people were told if they didn't take a job, they couldn't collect their wage. Their wage is in money form that they say to the employer, one, you feed me, clothe me, house me, protect me. If you don't give me that wage, I will not be able to be fed, be housed, right, etc. So in reality, that employer is the master who can tell us to do anything, can tell us to come in and take a job, which is a call a vaccine, come in to do anything. Why? Because he is your master and we are slaves. Our foreparents before the first of no, before the 13th of October 1834, and I'll explain why that date is important. Before that date, we were not slaves. We were free person. So in speaking about that part about slaves, that's introduction, Brother Elton, and
Yes, so
listeners
you are
into the
saying,
concept or the idea or the main set, a mindset, sorry, to show why I argue that our foreparents were not slaves and that slavery was never a crime against humanity. That is important. Today,
but
if you say slavery is a crime against humanity, then wage earning is a crime against humanity. What happened to us in those prison industrial complex was a crime against humanity, and it's the only crime against humanity we've had collectively in history. Our
so
oppressors want us not to differentiate that because they want to get away from their obligation to us. They were criminals. They were the first set of terrorists recorded in history. The Europeans were the first terrorists recorded in history, and they committed terrorist acts against Africans who were not even at war with them, who were not even enslaved.
so you're saying, Brother Rudy, that the Africans who were enslaved in the Caribbean and the Americans were not enslaved. So then, if they were not enslaved, then was there a need to have the Emancipation Proclamation and the Emancipation Act? Seems as if Brother Rudy has had problems with his system. He's off. So, are the rest of you hearing me? Because Brother Rudy seemed not to have been hearing me. Yeah. Are the rest of you hearing me? Because apparently Brother Rudy was not hearing me.
Yeah, hearing you.
I don't know what happened to his system. So we can probably discuss what he's been saying until he returns. Now, Brother Rudy is saying that we were not slaves. And he advanced the idea that because we did not respond as slaves to our quote unquote masters, so and we were always in rebellion against our condition, that gives us the right to say that our foreparents were not slaves. Are you in agreement with such a statement? Or anybody has any supporting argument or disapproval with such statement? Because I mean that's revolutionary.
Yes, I think we can agree with that statement because we have learned that our foreparents were always rebellious against the treatment of the African people. That is why they formed the various what we would call it, uprising, because they save the money to do whatever they want. But then as you grow older, you come to the realization that the plantations that were bought, it was a kind of a prison system because what the Portuguese did when our foreparents, the plant, the crops and so on, the reap, they turn a middleman so the our foreparents could not have sold their stuff directly to the people.
Well, in Guyana, we know that our people were not given direct access to the plantations to feed the Indians who were there. We had to sell to the Portuguese middlemen. And because of that, we know that the Portuguese were able to develop what we call today generational wealth. Because if our farmers planted cassava, let's say in today's terms, and they would have sold the cassava for $100 a pound, the Portuguese man would have sold it then for $200 after. In other words, he made just as much money in turning
Money
a
as what we sold it
transaction,
for.
which will last maybe a day or two, maybe a week, right? While our foreparents had to plant that cassava for months, tend to it. So his effort over months is converted to that Portuguese man's effort in a week, right? And to what makes it more glaring, it was that let's say for instance my village, they may have been, let's say 200 farmers. Those 200 farmers would have been supplying two or three Portuguese men. So what those two or three Portuguese men earned in a very short period is what our foreparents would have earned over the year.
Had to work for so long.
Over the year, right? Because they were
Yes.
granted trade license while we were not granted trade license. Likewise, they had the right to trade in our community in that goods and services, that things that we could not produce, they brought it to the village and sell it at
Yes.
exorbitant prices. So they were able, that's why today in Guyana, the Portuguese community owns much more than the African community because they were given the opportunity to create generational wealth.
Brother McCray,
Yes, my brother.
one question. Um, differentiate forced labor and exploitation as regards slavery. What are the differences?
Forced labor
And
can,
exploitation.
well, any exploitative labor situation is forced. Basically, you have no choice. Whether they pay you a small bit, like for instance, what happened to our Indian brothers and Chinese and others who came as indentured servants, they had to work because they signed a contract.
Okay.
It was a contract, but the quantum of work that they did relative to that contract and what they were paid for, no, it can still be considered exploitative. But
Right.
the fact that you
But they,
signed a contract, you were forced to honor that contract. So you can say that's forced labor too. On the
yeah.
other hand, enslavement, which is what they attempted to do, they were forced to work for free.
And
That's
that
the
is
main.
enslavement.
That is the major difference. We were forced to work for free. Well, Brother Rudy is now contending that was not enslavement; it was more imprisonment because
Curtail freedom.
they curtailed your freedom. They had bounty hunters watching you. They had people guarding you outside the plantation. Once you leave the plantation, these people would have,
Bring them back dead or alive.
right?
So,
So that's the argument
okay.
advanced by Brother Rudy.
Understandable. Good argument. I appreciate that. But what is enslavement?
Enslavement is where someone did not voluntarily enter into become accept his condition as a slave, but he's forced to work as a slave.
But he
He's
didn't rebel.
enslaved, right? What the difference is? I accept my condition as a slave because I may have done a crime in my community or against a family, so I become a slave to that family. I will have to do their bidding for free. And generally, that is the kind of slavery that existed in Africa prior to the transatlantic slave trade. So you did a wrong to a family, they enslave you. You work for that family, you can buy yourself out of slavery, or in time, if you work 5 years, 10 years, you got your freedom back. Whatever is
Well,
the arrangement.
well, I think there are rumors where we hear something like that happens in the Chinese community.
Well, it happened in most uh, early societies. That kind of a thing happened in most societies in time gone by,
Okay.
right? But that's why
Well,
people are taking pains to differentiate between what chattel slavery as against that slave. No, the chattel, where your humanity was taken away. You were no longer considered human because, in fact, there were theories advanced in Europe, and it was my first reading of it came through from a fellow Bartolomeo de las Casas. Note you, Bartolomeo de las Casas. He was a Catholic priest,
I
and he was
remember.
deemed the protector of the Indians. So he came to investigate the plight of the Amerindians, when I say Indians in this case, in the Americas. And he felt that they were brutally treated, blah, and so on, which I will not argue because that was a fact. He saw he reported what he saw. But he turned around and say, look, these people are not suited to be treated this way. There is a group of people that we can treat this way because they are not humans. They're half
Is the
humans.
Africans.
The Africans. Not Bartolomeu de las Casas was a priest. He went to university in Spain. He's a Spaniard. He studied in Spain. And
I'm familiar with his name from the book They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima.
okay. Now, prior to Columbus venturing into these parts, just about 30 years or so before, that is when the Moors, they said the Moors were kicked out of southern Europe, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and the rest of it, right? Now, the Moors taught the Moors established two universities in Spain. The
Yeah.
Moors are the people who took education to Spain,
To Europe and in general.
to Europe. The Moors, black African people, were
Yeah.
there teaching the Europeans civilization.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
for a European who sat at the feet of the Moors to learn, to turn and say that These people are not human. These people are subhuman, and the rest of it. He was lying. It was just after the
Because they
crusade.
want to demonize the Africans. That is why they use those terms and say what they had to say.
This was after the just after the crusades, when they
Mm-mm.
pushed the Muslims out of Europe. All right. So so they wanted to show to their people. It was all about showing to their people that we are superior, even though the people we are the ones who have been teaching, who have been ruling you for over 700 years. Note again, I mentioned 700 years of rulership by the Moors, by the Muslims in Europe. They did not enslave them, they taught them. They encouraged them to become more human than they were. So it was all a vendetta against the black man.
And it's
Okay,
going on until
it
now.
continues to today. I
Right.
think Brother Rudy them is coming back in now. Though I don't understand, I'm seeing Brother Rudy here as being online.
Well, the whole intention was to hide history. It was to
Yes,
present a false history,
yes,
which I bet you as going as to say in good self, they're still doing.
yeah.
And the Indians are just like the white people. They turn in history around to suit themselves.
Well, they are rewriting history in Ghana, and our African historians in this country are turning a blind eye to it.
Well, let me say this. The Indians, if you check the history of the Indians, you are not surprised at their attitude and behavior. You have to go back and check on the history. Right? Remember, they
Uh,
were
Brother, if you don't mind, if you mind using your video when you speak, because this will be on Facebook after it will be presented on Facebook. In fact, we should be live on Facebook now, but I'm getting some problems with my computer. The computer which I should be using to do that other part is down. So, and this one is giving me is also a problem, child. So, if you mind bringing up your images when you speak, so that at least people looking at the videos, the video later will see the person speaking.
When I put my phone, I unmute my phone, the video stop.
Okay, okay, all
yeah,
right. Well, I mean, some people, your the bandwidth on some for some people may be very low. That I can understand that too.
yeah. But it's very, very, very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. I mean, you don't get these kind of discussions. So, and I expected more participants.
Well, they most of them probably were hoping to go on the Facebook thing because people generally will prefer to use that. They just and they text it. But as I said, I try to go on to Facebook, but it's not. Uh, I I ran into one problem was I couldn't remember my Facebook password, so I couldn't log in when the thing came up.
Okay. So Brother Rudy is coming back on?
Well, I hope so. I'm seeing him, but he's not coming up.
Because at first I was a little concerned about the argument that he raised, but then he made some what I may call some relevant points, and I would have liked to know that he can expand.
Yes, well, that's what we are.
It pays to listen.
Yeah.
And with technology now, we are seeing lots of facts that were hidden are being now revealed.
Yes. Let me call him and see. But maybe I'll take off my microphone, so, but you guys can just discuss as I'm off.
Yeah, I think you know is who, man. This is Scar, brother McCray. you recognized me some time ago. Oscar, they call me Scar.
I know it is. What I'm concerned about is that the viewers, people will be looking at it on Facebook, will just be seeing Samsung.
You know, I'm without shirt and all that. So
Okay, okay.
it's a little warm in Antigua, so you gotta go present yourself in a more proper manner,
I hear that. I hear that.
But I'm enjoying the discussion. At the moment, I'm reading They Came Before Columbus. And I just finished reading The Stolen Legacy by Dr. George Granville Mona James.
Hello, I would like to speak.
Okay, he is there now. Good.
Okay.
Listen carefully,
Sorry.
my brothers. Listen.
Yeah.
Mute the phone.
No, he's back here now. He's there now,
All right,
Sister
let us
Ingrid.
speak. We don't have time, so let's make up the time. Listen, we'll take up the time now. I'm saying that we went off. I'm saying that we went off the topic completely.
Yeah.
So I like to talk about. I'm going to define slavery in such a way to really smooth off the confusion or the bumps that we had. First of all, and this will only take about 3 minutes. Now, why is there no slave trade mentioned in the history books about the North Atlantic slave trade? But there is something called the transatlantic slave trade. Now listen to my argument. North American, and I'll read it, North American colonies were initially populated by British citizens who were Caucasians, white. Many of those British citizens were kidnapped after they lost consciousness, after being enticed into pubs and given excessive alcohol, right? They were placed on boats sailing to North America to be sold, and they call it indentured, against their will. British women and men were taken from poor houses and workhouses, placed on boats and taken against their will to America, North America. Children were taken off streets from poor houses or sold by their parents, then placed on ships sailing to America to toil long hours on farms and mines in America. In America, all the people that I've mentioned there, the white British people, sailed across the Atlantic Ocean from Britain to the continent of North America, and they sold. Tell me then why there's no mention of those are slavery. People kidnapped and sold. Why there's no North Atlantic slave trade, right? Now there's one other, now listen to this other part. India, let us take India. In the Indian Ocean, Ceylon, which is Sri Lanka and India, slaves were moving constantly from place to place. They even moved to South Africa. In fact, you'd be surprised to know the amount of Indian slaves that moved to South Africa. In fact, most of them that went to South Africa were slaves. But nobody talks about the Indian Ocean slave trade. They were placed in boats, they were traded and they were sold. So it's important that we understand the damage that they want to do to us using the word slaves. We were never slaves. In fact, if you think about it seriously, the Indians, the Europeans, they were slaves, and out of that continued indentured, and then next thing you know, continued wage labor. We have to understand that. I have writings of the workers in London, in England, who were expelled or exiled from London, from England, just because they wanted to join a union. The Third Puddle Workers, 1833, I think it was. So the point I'm making, all these things we're talking about, refer to these people books, refer to our own mindset. Our mindset right now is one, certain words that they use it in order to mess us up, not for our progression, not for us to learn anything and understand anything. So when we quote this book and that book and this book, it doesn't help us. What is helping us? One, emancipation, and this is what I wanted to bring out in this lecture. Emancipation wasn't a given to any African anything. Emancipation did not give us freedom. We forced the British. We're the first people on this planet to defeat capitalism. And we don't want to talk about that. The defeat of the plantation system was the defeat of capitalism. The first defeat for capitalism. And what it was is this. In the 1823 revolution, which is not even finished today, and Africans don't even understand it in this country. The 1823 revolution continues in such a way with passive resistance and sometimes violent resistance. Gandhi didn't bring passive resistance to Africans. We brought down the plantation system mostly by passive resistance. We sicked out. We forced them to change and change and change so many laws until it became useless. The plantation system became useless to be worked because we Africans, they were not providing labor. After 1823, we stopped providing labor. We stopped cooperating, well, we never cooperated anyway. The situation was so bad that the plantations were only operating at 40% efficiently. No business could operate with 40%. Secondly, we got to understand this, as the labor became very hard on the plantation, land became abundant, but the land could not be sold because there was nobody to work land. So Britain had to work out something with the plantation operators in order to save the day, because what was happening, all these plantation operators borrowed money. They did not own the land. They borrowed money from the finance houses in Britain. And it's that money that was in danger. If the plantation system went bankrupt, and I give a word for it, the West, I call it the West, the bubble, the West Indian bubble. It's not mentioned in history, but the West Indian bubble would have burst. So they had to have a compromise. They compromised with our foreparents. What you call Emancipation Act of 1833 was a compromise to save their skin. And another thing everybody got to understand that they're not understanding, the so-called abolitionists were not our friends. You see, whenever we lose, the oppressors win. And when we win, the oppressors win. And that's the situation at emancipation. Those abolitionists didn't care anything about Africans and slavery. If they were, and I want you to think about this, I want you to think about this seriously. The abolitionists had their money invested in the East India Company. The East India Company paid their Indian slaves wages. They had a budget for wage labor. That's the East India Company. The West India Company had no such budget. So they had an undue advantage over. Remember, they didn't, since they refused to pay our foreparents what was due to them, some kind of wage, they paid, so they had no cost to labor in the economic system, in the production system. So the abolitionists having their profit cut because they invested so large in the East India Company who had to pay wages. the West India Company could undercut them and still make a bigger profit. And that is what was happening. So the abolitionists wanted them to start pay wages. That is what this so-called freedom of slaves were. But listen to this. India was under the control of the British at a time when the so-called emancipation was being thought about. Now, at a time in 1834, India had been experienced over 800 years of slavery. I repeat, over 800 years of slavery in various parts of India. Now, why is it that the abolitionists were not concerned with those millions of Indians who were affected by slavery, but they were concerned about 800,000 Africans in the Caribbean and Guyana who were pressured, suffering under slavery? That's rubbish. If the British authorities, and I'm saying empire yet, or I could say the British Empire for a better word, if the British Empire, India, and the Caribbean were experiencing slavery, then one act would have removed slavery from both India and the Caribbean and Guyana. Instead, the 1833 Act removed or set in motion the stage for emancipation, 1834 Emancipation Proclamation. That 9 years after, in 1843, the Indian Slave Emancipation Act was passed. Why 9 years? People got to understand that. There's a reason. We won't go into that. But what is important to us to know is that every Indian who came, and I repeat, every Indian or every one of those Indian migrants, those poor untouchables, Dravidians who came to this country as migrant workers, who people usually talk about indenture. That's an whole nother thing. They don't even understand what indenture meant. Anyway, those poor people who came to this country in 1838, all those untouchables who came to this country were slaves when they were in the boat coming to this country. Teach that in schools. When they touched the ground of what they call British Guyana, they became free. No one could have denied them wages. That's the important thing. And how come that happened? That happened because Africans carry on a protracted struggle to free this land. Here people talk about free the land. In America, they're still talking about free the land. We free the land in South America. We free the land in Guyana. Africans free the land in Guyana. It don't even mention in history. We free the land so much so that the Portuguese, the Chinese, everybody who came to this country had to receive wages because of us. Nobody could have denied them wages. And this is important when we're talking about slavery, when we're talking about Africans in this country. If you don't have the terms right, if you go into battle with the wrong tools, with the wrong gun, you lose in fact, you won't be doing the battle. If I go into battle with slingshot, I'm only fooling myself. And this is what's happening today. Today we face history like going into a nuclear battle with slingshot. That's what Africans doing in Guyana. That's why Africans are going nowhere. Because we're not taking concepts, defining concepts in our own self-interests, and then put it to people and make them say either deny it or show why they have to reject it. We're not asserting ourselves. We have to research. You cannot assert yourself and want to be anything in this country. Look how we behave. So first of all, we have to understand emancipation and understand that the 1st of August is not Freedom Day for any African. The 1st of August, I repeat, is not Freedom Day for Africans. We were always free. The 1st of August should be known as African Victory Day, AV Day. We should, when the 1st of August comes, what they call Emancipation Day, we're going to salute it as AV Day, African Victory Day. European got Victory Day. European got victory over Japan, victory over this, over that. We had victory over the runners of the plantation system. We don't even understand it. Then we got the foolishness of our people in university, our academics who go telling us that, oh my, who tell us
we are hearing you, brother.
Oh, good. Then we have our academics who in league with those oppressors, because you see, I know I went through that. I published my own books. I never wait for anything from any university until I publish my books. But when you want to be published by a university, you have to go according to what they tell you to do. So you have to write rubbish in order to get accepted. But I'll tell you something. Sorry, this thing, leave it, it's okay, it's going. Yes, we in this country have to, and in the education system, we have to say to ourselves, one, emancipation means freedom. Emancipation emancipation means that victory over the oppressors. That's the first thing you have to say. Secondly, we must say, don't bring that slave thing to me. If you bring that slave thing to me, you have to, all the other people that were slaves long after me should be included. Not long after me, but long after what you're saying that I was. And if I can show you clearly what slavery means, that slavery means that someone must feed you, clothe you, shelter you, and protect you. And slavery never protect my foreparents, not my foreparents. Then my foreparents were never slaves. But this is what I wanted to talk about the university. University want us to be crawling on our knees. So they developed something. They didn't understand what no. What's the name of it? When, excuse me, can anyone help me here? Because this is when we had from 1834 to 1838, we had indentureship, apprenticeship. I want you to understand what damage the university is doing to you. They tell you, and I hear people should be responsible, talking about that we became emancipated in 1838. What kind of rubbish is that? There's a reason why they're doing that. What is made? When they said you became emancipated on August 1st, 1838, can you see what kind of upmanship they're bringing on you? And they told you that the people who came here that you liberated arrived in 5th of May. Can you see what they're doing to you? 5th of May is a freedom day. I don't know how it became a freedom day because people didn't come to arrive. They came here to go back, but it's a whole other thing. But think about it. 5th of May is before the 1st of August. Can you see what your own scholars are doing to you? What your education system are doing to you? You've been here 200 years. You built everything in this country. People came here, they didn't go into concentration, onto a camp, refugee camp. People who came to this country did not go into refugee camps. They went into houses. Whatever those houses were called, loggia or whatever at that time, they were housed. They were fed, etc. And they were able to plant on soil that you caused to be arable. Because if all those you were pressured to do it, but the fact is you erected the walls, you cut those basic canals. There are other canals that were cut after that. But the basic canals, the drainage and irrigation was possible. So everyone who came to this country, they were fed, clothed because of you, and you sit down being second rate, sit down because of your education institution, saying foolish things like, no, I hear something. When your foreparents walked away from those plantations or ran away from the plantations, and they created their communities in the bush, they planted rice, they planted vegetable, etc. That was before 1838. Yet your books, you allow your children to read books that say that the Indians were the first rice planters in this country. Africans in this country deserve to get what they get because they're lazy-minded. We are lazy-minded. I talk about it. What's your problem? You're disrespecting your foreparents. And if you disrespect your foreparents, you disrespect yourself. And you got even right to be around. Because it's on the backs of your foreparents that you go forward to the next step. And if you walk on their back and don't respect them, where are you going? Where are you going? Anyway, so what I wanted to clear this thing about slavery, to show that there was a North Atlantic slave trade, there was a Indian Ocean slave trade, and this thing they call Atlantic slave trade never existed. A set of criminal terrorists who kidnapped free Africans and brought them here. Another thing I heard when Brother Elton was speaking, there was no culture of slavery in Africa. You had a situation where there was no culture in Africa. I gotta put this clearly, but be very, very careful. There's no culture in Africa, any part of Africa, where Africans were taken and placed into camps, into confinements, and not fed, etc. And not paid, not given some compensation for their work. If I go, and that's very important. Slavery, even if you say slavery existed in Africa, what? But what happened in Guyana and the Caribbean never happened in the world before, because every bit of your labor, power, the returns to you was taken from you. So don't ever go into any discussion talking about slavery in Africa. This is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that the crime against humanity that occurred in Guyana, British Guyana, and in the Caribbean was new to the world. The environment that we were placed in, which was called private prison industrial complex, they gave a name plantation, was new to the world. And another thing, I'll explain to you what chattel means. And I'll go slowly. And I'm saying this out of my head as a fact. Chattel was the term the European, the Caucasian criminals fell upon after they couldn't turn Africans into slaves. That is, and this is very important, you could go and look this up into any dictionary. Chattel, first of all, a slave is someone, as I mentioned, food, clothing, shelter, protection, and master, someone who can say master or acknowledge master. A chattel is a piece of wood, the plow, the cow, but a chattel, and very important, is movable. Listen to me carefully. I'm saying something that is movable on the plantation. Real estate, the housing were not movable, so they were not chattel. Now, what am I saying? Why am I saying that? Now, Africans were dumb in terms of saying master. The plow was dumb in terms of saying master. The pick was thou, dumb, insane master. The pig and the cow and all those things that they call chattel never said master. You see? So the African, because he was not acknowledging like the pig, but he could be used, he could be moved. You see, a chattel could be moved from place to place, etc., etc. So the Africans, because he was behaving like the plow, etc., they call him chattel.
For real? Take
Understand
out
that?
a box I got in a black bag in the fridge to me at the front.
Excuse me, I hearing you. Yes, chattel. So this is what chattel is all about. Chattel isn't some thing with a special African thing. No, chattel is something that would not acknowledge or cannot acknowledge the Caucasian exploiters as master. That is the beauty. That's beauty. We never accepted them as master. So you're a chattel, we were dumb, we think. Because if we had accepted them as master, then we would have been slaves. All right. But another thing you got to understand, and this I could finish off I end off here. Now, on the plantation, as today, the most effort was spent on making us racial orphans, and that's another word you won't find in any book. That's I coined that word, racial orphans. And what was a racial orphan? Look, in Canada right now, there's a law against taking the children from the native people and keeping them in your house and introducing them and then sending back to what they call tribe. In South Africa, in Australia, there was a law against, because they were taking the children, turning them into Caucasian, and then letting them back and damaging the entire, what they call tribe, they call nation. Now, Africans, they spend most of the time on the plantation. That's why the chattel thing came in, wanting to turn our foreparents into racial orphans. That's why in 2008, after they so-called stopped the Atlantic slave trade, and that's another bogus lie, because name one African that was freed after the stopping of the Atlantic slave trade. Name one African that was freed when the British stopped those pirates, those criminals who were operating after 2008 and had Africans in their boats. And they took them away one way or the other. None was returned to Africa. They all were taken to the Americas and sold. And they still remain. So the point I'm making, this stupidness about stopping slave trade and all that, it has nothing to do with any helping Africans. It was against the Spanish, especially Cuba. But the Spanish were competing with them in the market for sugar. And you probably would have started cotton soon, but sugar and other things, probably mining and all those things. So in order to prevent the Spanish and the French, but the Spanish mostly so, from getting labor, they stopped that particular program. Their program that they started, they stopped. So it's good to understand it. But why I mentioned 2008, after they couldn't control our minds, 1,800 and 1808. Why I mentioned 1808? In 1812, the next push, after they stopped the importation of Africans, the next push was to really control their minds proper. So they brought in men like, what's his name? Ray and such, but James and these people who were missionaries. And if you know the history of that same James was one of those people in Ireland, because he was Scottish, and they went to Northern Ireland, who was causing the Irish who were Catholics, not to own land, couldn't even, and this is why they had to have the Emancipation Act. They couldn't own land. Irish people, Catholic people couldn't own lands. They couldn't even, the priest couldn't speak to their book, to their Catholic book. He would have been put to death. That is Britain I'm talking about. I'm talking to Britain before 1828. I'm talking to the same Britain who 1812 and 1813, 14 were telling us about being good, but telling us Jesus and people good to each other and so on. These are the people who were dealing with white on white violence. And another thing you must know, I mentioned this in this thing on reparation. Do you realize that I made a count of deaths, number of deaths from the time we were brought to this country in about the first quarter of the 17th century to 1763, over 3 million Caucasians died in white on white violence, and it was not political war. They were religious wars. I want you to understand this, what you're dealing with. You don't even know what you're dealing with. And I want you to understand the Dutch. We had Inquisition. I see Goldberg was being pulled up for something that she don't really quite understand. The German Inquisition, I call that what they call the Holocaust is the German Inquisition. But I'm gonna finish off now. The German Inquisition, but I want you to know this before I go. What we thought that the Roman and the Italian Inquisition were bad. Have people hung up on cross in the street, hung on poles throughout the street. But they say the most brutal Inquisition was the Dutch Inquisition. The same very people who were our first managers of the prisons that we were placed in. And another thing you must go before I'll stop for now, and then if any questions. Do you know that the Dutch, and we must always remember this for the reparation people, the British only had us for 71 years. The most of our time in incarceration in those prison industrial complexes were held by the Dutch. They have a lot of compensation to do in terms of reparation, because reparation is what we will fight for, but not like what those people are doing. Reparation, we understand from when we came here to emancipation. Then our labor is taken all the way from us. So we were fighting from emancipation back to 1625. So in closing, I would like you to understand this. 1625. Sometimes I say these numbers, you got to watch me. Please, 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 don't be particular about terms. If we get our terms right, we get our action right. Like we used to say in the old days, if you get your theory right, your action will be right. But in this year, in these people in this country always talk, I don't want to hear but talk. I just want to act. You cannot act correctly if you don't have the right things in your brain in which to talk. It is very important. You have young people. I was there with the African History Month, and you have young people who talking silly things like, I want to talk about now. I want to talk about my computer thing that I'm doing. I want to talk about that is rubbish. Everything you do in life is history. Your whole existence is history. I'm speaking to you, every word when it reaches you is history. Your computer that you sit before is history. The maths that you do in school is history. the plow that you use is history give you the knowledge to make the plow, the whatever things you use to dig your farm. History is all that you have. Life only happens because history happens. Something has to die before some life comes into existence. Life cannot come into existence without something dying. Why I'm saying all this is that we haven't learned anything for ourselves by ourselves. We let these people mess up our minds with stupidity. And that's why we can't come together. We as African people, we have to come together and follow the path of our ancestors. Please, we will get where we're going if we follow the path of our ancestors. If we don't, in this country, we're fast being disappearing. I tell you why. Study the history of India. And when you see what happens after India independence, you see that Jack Dio and the PPP are doing the same things like India. This country will be split between Muslims and Indians, and we will be swept into the sea. You got to understand this. You got to understand that's why you have the largest mosque in a place where you don't have the largest Muslim community. It's a preparation for something that you're not even invited to the talks. So please be concerned about your history. Don't jump too far. Listen to concepts. Define concepts in your self-interest. Work with your elders. And don't tell me about youth. Youth with nothing in their head is still youth, is till we get nowhere. To be a young adult, you must sit at the feet of your grandmother, your grandparents, your old uncle, your old auntie. In my days, I was able to go in the barber shop and heard elders speaking and all these things. Nowadays, you're not nowhere to go except people talking foolishness about the place. So please be tentative to things that you do. Listen to your elders, listen to your family. You listen to your mom, listen to your aunt, listen to your father, those are the people we start first. If you don't listen, you'll never get anywhere. And with that, I say, Brother Elton, I know I had to push in that, but that's a chance I had to speak, so I had to speak. Ashe.
Thank you very much, Brother Rudy. That was quite a lot of information to absorb. I do hope those who were listening did absorb. And yes, some of us will have queries, some of us, because this information is basically in contra to what we were accustomed to, most of it. We will have questions. So I'll give you the opportunity to ask questions. My only question right now is, Brother Rudy, you said we were not slaves. I follow your argument, but I would like you to repeat or do some clarification on it, because I'm pretty sure there are among us those who are still pondering on it. How can that be?
No, that's beautiful. It's very important, brother Elton. It is not wrong or bad to have that need more clarification. That's beautiful. That shows that we are listening and we're interested. Now, clarification. I'm saying, and this is all, to be a slave, just like a lot of people are Christians and they heard Jesus said, slave obey your masters. And there are people who say Jesus is bad. There are people who saying that their Jesus is bad for saying slave obey your masters. But in context, don't mind, that's a whole other thing, who really said those words. But we ain't going into that. We're going according to the book. Jesus said that. He said, slaves obey your master. And to obey your master, to be a master, you have to go and put yourself, like append yourself onto someone, because it was dangerous in those days. Even in India in those days, with all those different principalities killing each other. It was dangerous. So somebody had to go onto somebody to get food. Well, let us say protection. First of all, protection. I'll come to get them. I'll even fight for you because you'll have the army and the strength. So protection, food, clothing, shelter. That is what I need as a slave from a master. And it's not bad. It's the way of life. He would abuse, that master would abuse me just as today these bosses are abusing people. Under all slave system, you find that abuse. And not only having the abuse, but I have many times to put up with my own abuse. Boom. However, for our foreparents, they were not slaves. They were placed in, in an institution, confinement, anything you want to call it. Look at the parallel with today's private industrial complex, in prison industrial complex. You'll be able to understand. When I was placed into that, I had an option. Then my foreparents were placed into that, they had an option. They could have said, listen, I accept you, and you do certain things to me, and we'll coexist. My foreparents said, listen, I don't want anything to do with you. You're criminals. If you turn your back, I'll be gone. Period. That is the difference between a slave. A slave has no way to run. A slave has to run to another master. That's why you had slave rebellion. But you had slave revolution. To be a slave, you have to change the whole institution of human relations. People don't understand the meaning of revolution anyway. But I'm saying the point is, we were not slaves. My foreparents were not slaves simply because they didn't buy into the system. If I was allowed, in fact, we need to have this in the community so we can speak differently. From the 13th of August, 1834, we start to become slaves. Gradually. Why? If you notice, Damon, why was Damon killed, murdered, lynched? Damon was lynched, and you know this well too, my brother. In that schoolyard, in that churchyard, what did he say? 700 Africans and him said, we are not working. We are not working. Did he not say that? And he said, I'll show you why to boot. We are self, I don't like to use the word independent, self-reliance. We depend upon ourselves. That is what Damon did. He raised that flag of, I don't like to use the word self-determination, but they call it independence. And that is powerful because he continued with his foreparents. He worked for no one. And then, if you notice again, going from there, we even had money to back up our action. Some of us pulled the money and went and buy old plantation. The buying of plantation was a continuation of that process that I'll never be a slave. That was so. The people, a slave is not an independent person, but we are the dependent person. The mistake, and the first time I say it in this open, the mistake Africans make, and at emancipation after 1833, was they allowed the priests to point them in the direction of buying land rather than saying, hey, I can do what we used to do before emancipation. I'm going into interior. If Africans had gone into the interior and opened their villages, nobody could tell them foolishness about crown lands. Nobody could tell them foolishness about all this crazy, because that land would have been theirs, just as how the British came to this country and they own land. Who gave them this land? The Dutch came. Who gave them this land? We had the right to go in there. My foreparents know that. That's why they went into and marooned villages for their children.
Brother Rudy, now you've
Yes.
mentioned something there that only recently some of those issues were, because the people that established Baracara, Do you know it was only last year or year before the last, very recently, they were given rights to those lands. And I'm aware of families that went and settled on the Escribo River. Like, for instance, there's a family at I'm trying to remember the name of the place. Just about 20 miles upriver on the west. Those families, their lands were those maroons, some of where we had maroonage. Those lands were never recognized as to the owners, even under our present independent governments. The British never recognized them, and governments until now have not recognized some of those lands as belonging to some of those people. In
We gotta
fact,
fight for that.
the 2010 land repeal makes those people vulnerable to be thrown off,
Mm, well,
right?
brother Elton, you know what your fight has to be. Our fight has to be. The truth must be told. The truth is the truth. The truth cannot be a lie. So we as elders, we have to get the young people sit around us and put that kind of information to them. They have the energy to do what we used to do when we had the energy. So please, Brother Elton, I'm glad that you recognize that. If you can have, for example, that should be a project at the university.
Yeah,
Someone
the
who has
place
imparted the
I failed to remember just now was Bokal. Just around the Bokal neighborhood, I met a family who said their foreparents were there since in the 1800s, probably
wow,
before Iman, and their lands were being threatened by the government. This would have been around 2014, 2015. I was there.
wow. So we have our work is made up for us. In fact, after hearing this thing that we've done, don't mind it was with Butch and all that. From this particular day, we should have a kind of movement, a kind of energy that is saying, hey, let us start looking at our security, our land security. People talk about food security. You can't get food security if you got land security. So let us start, my brother. Let us see if you could galvanize some kind of interest in a truthful pursuit. That is checking out what lands we have, what lands were taken away from. Where are all those maroon villages that we hear about?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Those
So we
maroon
going,
villages were disbanded. They were not,
yes.
right? No. So, brothers and sisters on the call, if you have any questions, maybe raise your hands or just come in to the microphone, unmute yourselves and ask your question. Because I know, I feel that you have this information being so revolutionary. I am pretty well convinced that you will have questions to ask.
Good.
There is a sister Olive. I think she wants to say something.
Yes,
She has unmuted.
good afternoon. Brother Woody, that's good information. Where could we find it after now for those who missed it? I tried
Uh,
to send it to some friends, but I don't know if they're watching. But
okay.
Do you have an
I
email?
will. I will
Do you
be
have an
1 minute. I will be posting what took place here on Facebook, because normally I'll try to record it, but I have another computer. Well, that one is down. That's what which I would have used to log into on Facebook, but I couldn't do that today, right? So, but Brother Rudy, I know as a document, and I think he's preparing a book, which all of this information will be embodied in
okay,
also.
so
shade?
when the book is ready, it'll be on Facebook so people could go buy it.
No,
No.
I tell you something, my sister. As the book is being prepared, it should be, that's how we should write a book. It should be bits and pieces should be shared in the community so you can enrich it.
Yes.
You shouldn't run a corner, write a book and then present it to people. In writing the book, we have communal discussion on the book in order to make the book real. So yes, you'll have bits and pieces if you have an email. So the book will be as a community book rather than an individual put something together. So if you have your
Brother,
email, you get a lot of power.
brother,
Yeah,
if you can fix if you move your screen a bit, so, because we're just seeing the top of your head. Move the right. Okay.
Now, another thing is this. Why not make this a
Sister
community?
Olive, if you can put on your mic, your camera so that people can see you, because this, as I said, I want to present it on Facebook, so at least let's let the people
Now,
see.
what about if you make this a community that every once a month we meet and we listen to discussions and everybody participate? So don't you think that's better than just a one-time thing?
I'd be glad. Hey,
Because
Brother Elton.
because African let's say the black month, this deliberated month or whatever they call it for the black people, it shouldn't be a one-time month. Every day the struggle is
Ashe.
on, so we supposed to have that struggle, keep the fire on. So you should think about it once a
Sister,
month. We
sister,
meet
once
and
a month, ACDA have a ACDA hour, this is one of our presentations, the presentation for this month. But personally, I wouldn't mind if I know people will come on to arrange for another Sunday for Brother Rudy to
yeah,
join us, and we can
like every
continue the
once a
discourse with
month
Brother
and we
Rudy.
have a discussion. Yeah,
No, no.
because
What I'm saying is, the ACDA have a ACDA hour, which is a once a month program. So this third Sunday is for ACDA. Brother Rudy came in to do this for today. But if we can get enough people interested, and I know Brother Rudy is willing, we can probably choose another Sunday, not the third Sunday, or even after the ACDA hour, we can probably do another session. It's up to us, up to Brother Rudy and those who are listening to make a decision. When do we bring Brother Rudy back?
okay, just let me know when you're doing it, okay?
No, no, you are part of it. You made the request, so help us to set a time, please.
Yeah, maybe just Sunday afternoon. This Sunday afternoon is good.
A Sunday after the
Yeah,
ACDA hour.
ask the other people on the
Then you can
chat.
send me by text, whatever it is, if you don't
Right,
want
we
to
go.
talk.
This like
And
a discussion
if
board.
you can all put your email addresses or something in the text, so that whatever decision we make on this program about this continuing this discussion, you will all be informed. Okay. Well, Brother Rudy, seeing that we have no comments, no questions, I will allow you to give a parting comment before we close. Yeah. And I must thank you all for participating into this program, and hope that you will be here. Join us next month on the third Sunday for another ACDA hour. Okay.